Hello, this is C Sharp Fundamentals from scratch. This is Alex Horton. I have with me a guest here. She's trying to be shy here because she's a little sleepy, but she's my wife and I's youngest daughter. Say hi, AJ.
Hi, this is Daddy.
Yes, this is Daddy. So today we're going to be learning a little bit more about algorithms, and we're also going to learn how to consume a web API. Now, this is a huge jump in some of the code that we've been doing, and this particular lesson is meant for you to follow along with. You may not understand some things in this particular lesson, but what we're going to do is we're going to go back in a subsequent lesson, and we're going to go over exactly what we did. So I have gone ahead and created a console here application from scratch, and let me get rid of that empty line up there. And what we're going to do is we're going to utilize the NuGet package manager, as well as do an API call to a test API. And we're also going to learn a little bit more about making methods and functions. And we're also going to create our first actual class that we've done in this particular series of videos. So, as you can tell, right here, I've got the lesson that we're going to do today, and it's called Consuming a Web API. Now, an API, we're going to learn what an API is, what it's used for, why we use an API. We're going to understand the logic behind the API that we create today, or the client we create today. We're going to utilize the NuGet package manager to get ResSharp, as well as Newtonsoft JSON. And those are libraries that are going to help us to do what we're going to try and get accomplished today. And we're going to understand what libraries are actually used for. So we've got some steps here that we're going to take before we get started with actual coding and writing actual C# code. So the first thing that we're going to do is up in the Tools menu, we're going to go down to the NuGet Package Manager, and we're going to say Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. And let's click that. And you should see nothing installed right now. If you see some stuff installed, it's because it was scaffolded into your build for your C# console. But you shouldn't see anything right now. Right, AJ?
Right.
That's right. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go over and browse the NuGet packages to get the packages that we need. To make sure that we are pointing at the right place, over on the right hand side where it says Manage Packages for Solution, you should see the down in here, NuGet.org. That's the official place that you can get most, if not all, of your NuGet packages for libraries that you might see out there that you might want to use. So once we've gone there, go to Browse. And at the top, you'll see that we see Newtonsoft.json. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on that one time. You'll see a version number, version 12.0.3. And over on the right, when you click on it, in your other window over here, or the other side of the screen here, you'll see your project name. You can click at the top there, and it'll say not installed, and it'll tell you the latest stable version of JSON.net, Newtonsoft.json.net. Down here it tells you there's a description. It's a popular high-performance JSON framework for .NET, version 12.0.3, the author, the license, and then some other stuff down here. It'll tell you dependencies that you have to have, and these dependencies are libraries that you have to have for this JSON library to work, because libraries depend upon other libraries most of the time. And so you want to make sure that you have all of these libraries installed before you can do that. Now, if you install a JSON library, if you install a NuGet package and you don't have the dependencies, it'll still let you install it. But when you go to build your code, you'll get a bunch of errors, and it'll tell you, hey, you don't have this particular dependency installed. So we're going to go ahead and go back up here and click the install button. A small window will pop up that says, hey, you're going to make changes to solution. Click OK to proceed with the changes below. It tells you what you're changing. You can say OK. And so what you want to do is just say OK. And down here in the package manager in the output here, you'll see right here that we installed that package. And to confirm that, in the upper right hand corner in our Solution Explorer, you'll see under Packages, you should see newtonsoft.json and then the version number over here. Right, AJ?
Right.
That's right. So, the next...
This is Daddy.
Yes, that's Daddy. The next package that we're going to install is called RestSharp. Now, what RestSharp is, it's a library that will allow you to consume RESTful web services, RESTful APIs. And I'll explain the difference between the APIs in a minute and what an API is. But we've got to get these preliminaries out of the way. Preliminaries. Say preliminaries. Yeah, that's good enough. So, so we're going to do a search up here for RestSharp. So just type in RESTSHARP and hit enter, and there it is. Now we're going to install RestSharp, and we're also going to install RestSharp newtonsoft.json, this one right here. It just makes it easier to work with both of them. So we'll install RestSharp, and it'll show you there that it's in there. And we're going to do the JSON one as well. Say OK. And now under all three of these, we've got our packages. And now you can come up here to the solution, the NuGet solution handler and manager, and close it. And then just save your project just to be on the safe side. So what is an API? Say API.
PPI.
Not PPI. Say A. P. I. Say API.
PPI.
Okay, that's good enough. Okay, so what is an API? An API is called an application programming interface. And basically what an API is, it's one way for one computer program to talk to another computer program through a common protocol or a common communication protocol, like SOAP services or RESTful web services or anything like that. We're going to concentrate on SOAP and RESTful for a minute here. SOAP services are XML, they're XML documents that reside on a server somewhere that run as a API service that you can reach out to, and you can send commands to, and you can get information from. All APIs do is it makes it possible for your computer program, which is called the client, to talk to the server. Okay, in this instance, we're going to keep it real simple. So, what is an API used for? Say, what's an API used for? See, what's an API used for? Okay, that works. APIs, again, are used just to have one computer program talk to another computer program. You use them to send data to and to receive data from different sources of data. A great example of this, when you're looking at JavaScript, Ajax, you can use Ajax to call out to a web service and bring information back to your web page. And so that's what you would use something like Ajax for. In this instance, we're going to just use a web API. And a web API is one that you can get information to and from just regularly over the internet. SOAP services you usually have to authenticate against, meaning that you have to have a username, a password, some kind of a key or something like that. And they're only accessible to specific computers and IP addresses and clients. And they're, big businesses use them a lot of times. But they're kind of going the way of the earth for RESTful SOAP services, or RESTful web services, I should say. And then you have RESTful web services. Now, what a RESTful web service is one that you can consume a web service via the internet using commands and function calls, basically in the URL that you send information to and from to. Man, that's a mouthful, isn't it? Let's take a look here real quick at an API here. So let's go. I've got something off screen here. We're going to open up a web browser. We're going to go to dummy.restapiexample.com. And this is a great page that you can use to test your client to make sure that you're, sending data to and from your client in the API. So JSON, I'm trying to remember the acronym for it. I think it's JavaScript object notation. I think object notation. I can't remember. It's object, or I think it's object notation. Let's just search Google for JSON. Look at that. I am right. JavaScript object notation. So it's basically a way for people to read and write commands between JavaScript and your client, or using JavaScript, transmitting data to and from. And it will look something like this here. So this is an example of JSON here. Now the issue that you have with any kind of an API call, whether if it's SOAP or if it's JSON, is parsing out the data and sending the data. Let's do a example SOAP API. Okay, so here's an example of a SOAP API here. And when you see it, it looks a lot like XML because it's basically what it is. It's XML. You have your elements, you got your parameters in here, web service name, all that kind of stuff. And I actually learned on SOAP services first and migrated to JSON, RESTful API stuff. So, but basically, if you look here, the JSON, or the RESTful web service allows you to send data in a URL just like that. So you see the route or the function, and it says create here, and that's what your URL would say. This is a post you're sending to, and then if I clicked on this, it'll show you, hey, it has to be a post. If I do a get, which is getting information from, I click this, I'll get a ton of information. And if I look at this as raw data, this is JSON right here. This is all JSON right here. So the toughest part, usually, for many people, is being able to take that and to put it into something that you can use. That's always the toughest part, is serializing and deserializing your requests and responses that the web service can understand. What we're going to do today is we're going to do some of that. Right?
Right.
That's right. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started here. You got any questions over here?
Yes.
What's your questions?
My question is, unless it's gone in her work done and mommy's sleepy.
Yes. Mama's sleeping and Lexus is at work. Okay. So the first thing the next thing we're going to do, we've already done these two. We've gotten the NuGet packages, and now we're ready to do some coding here. So the first thing that we have to understand is, what is the data going to look like when we send it? What do we have to send to get something back? Well, we've already got an example over here of what we would send to get something back. And that, I can't drag that. And that is this right here. So your URL that you're going to send would look just like this. If I wanted to get a specific employee, I would send this. So let's go back here and let's look at this request that we have here. Let's say I want to get Garrett Winters information. Well, over here in this get, it says, hey, if you send employee number 2, you'll get Garrett Winters information back. So let's try that real quick. I'm going to copy this, open up a new tab, paste this, get rid of all that extra space there, and I'm going to change this from a 1 to a 2 and see what I get back. Well, look at there. I got Garrett Winters information back. You see that? Yes, okay, she's nodding her head. Okay, so we've got all this information back. So basically, somewhere on a service that called dummy REST API example.api /API v1, there is a method out there that is expecting an employee ID or just employee. This will get me all of the employees. This will get me a specific employee. This will give me an example of actually creating an employee. This will get me, this one here. This will get me an update to an existing employee, and then delete will remove employees. You should see that over here. And most of the time in any API, you've got examples here where you can click on it, and it should tell you what your stuff should look like. Just like this. And so this is what we call our data model. This is what our data is going to look like when we receive it back from the web service. So what we need to do is create variables or containers that allow us to store this data. Now the kicker with that is, if we go back over to our employees, we need to build our model so that it can store multiple employees. And we need to do this to where we don't have to keep creating code over and over and over again. So do you think that using a loop might help here? I think it might. So we're going to go ahead and create a loop using this information here. So what we're going to do first is we're going to do some code. And the first thing we need to do is going back to our data model. And one of the things that I like to do is I like to grab a copy of the results over here, and I put that in my C# code somewhere so I know what the model will look like this. So then I know that I need to create these fields. I need to create a status field. I need to create a data field that needs to be an array of ID, employee name, salary, age, and a profile image. And if you see this comment here, and then this right here, it means that you can get multiple ones back. Now, if I create one class, or I create one group of containers like this, I can either get one back or I can get multiple back. So what we're going to do is we're going to create our class. You still better put her up there. There you go. She's trying to take a nap here. I'm going to create our class. Yes, we're going to create a class. We're going to actually create two classes. Yes, we're in my office. So we're going to create two classes. So the first class that we're going to create is we're going to create our main class. Our main class is the highest level of model that you can get to. So if we see right here, this first opening curly brace and this last curly brace is one entire record. This is at the main level of our curly brace, so we know that's a variable. We know we've got a variable of data that is an array of variables. And in the previous talk, what we did was we had talked about having multiple variables inside of an array. All this is just a series of variables in an array value. And if we go back to our example of multiple returns on that, we can see this is an array, this is an array, this is an array, and so on and so forth. But there's only one data field. It's a collection of arrays underneath it. So we need to create something like that. So how would we do that? Well, fairly simple. What most people do is they create something called a data model. And all a data model is just a copy of what this data would look like. Follow me? Yeah, okay. She's nodding her head. Okay, so what we're going to do down here is we're going to create a class. Now, I believe this is our first class that we're going to create. So we're going to make it a public class. I'm trying to type with one hand, everybody. We're going to call it test class. TST class. And it's got to have the curly braces in there. Oh, you know what? That's kind of ugly. Let's take our caps off. Test. There we go. With a T, Alex. I'm trying to type with one hand because I've got little mama here in my other hand. Okay. Now, inside of this class, we need to create these two fields. So we see that we've got double quotes here. So we know we're dealing with a string. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this one public string. And we're going to call it status. Stop. Okay. And we're going to put get and set on there. And this is not called a variable, it's called a property. A property is basically something that you can set just about anywhere at the class level. Stop. At the class level, she's starting to get on me, y'all. And you can call on it as long as it's got the right access modifiers. And access modifiers, like we talked about earlier, allow you to see it. It's got the right signature, string, and I've got a name here, and I'll call it capital S because it doesn't like that. And then we need to make an array of data. So let's do that next. And what we're going to do instead of an array is we're going to create a list of something here, and we're going to call it data. Now, why did I put the question marks there? Well, the reason why I put the question marks there is because we don't have this part defined yet. We need to define this part here. So all you're going to do is you're going to create another class, and you're going to get a list of that particular class. So let's do that. We're going to call this public lower class test data. And then we're going to make 5 variables: ID, employee name, salary, age, and image, profile image. We're going to make them all strings because they're all strings up here. So let's do that real quick. Public. Oh, one of the things that you can do in Visual Studio is you can use code snippets. And what a code snippet is, it's intended to help you save some time. Yes, baby. What is it?
I see something.
Don't worry about that. That's not for you. Sit back. This is it. Code snippets are meant for you to save you time and effort. So if I start typing the word prop, P-R-O-P, it pops up there. And if I tab a couple of times, it automatically creates it for me. And then all I've got to do is just give it the right signature string. And I can call it ID with a capital I and a capital D. And if I tab a couple of times or hit enter, now I'm down to the next one. Stop, be still, baby. And I just repeat that. Now, if you don't put your hand in your mouth. If you want to save a lot of time and you're dealing with all strings, just copy it and paste it in there like that, and just change the name that you need to. Employee name. Name. Salary. Age. Image. Stop. And now we've got our test data class here. Copy that and we'll put it in here. Oop, helps if I put the T in there. So now what that means is I now have a collection of data here in this one variable. So no matter how many of these I can get one or I can get 100 of them. I'll have it in there, and I'd have to loop through this list of data to grab information out of there. Okay? Now, let's go to the next step. So we've got our containers created for this part here, and we've got our containers created for that there. So we're kind of ready on the data aspect part of this. Let me get rid of this real quick because I'm done with it. Now we're ready to call our API. So to do that, we're going to use a method called deserialize object and send API. And what those are they are objects inside of REST Sharp, and they're an object inside of newtonsoft.json. What those do is they do two different things. The first thing is it actually sends a request to our web service, and then it brings back the information that we need. So actually, I misspoke here. We need to create another method and call it send API. So that's what we're going to do. Anytime you get JSON back, it's going to come back to you in a string, and then you have to parse it out and determine what type of information you're working with. And then you have to cast it properly. Okay, so let's do the second step, the next step here, I should say. We're going to call it static, and it's static because it can change. Sit back. I'm going to send you upstairs. We're going to call it a string. We're going to call it send API. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pass in our URL from our web service. Because what we can do is in our arguments up here, if we so wanted to, we could pass in a URL and then pass it to this particular method. Now you see that we have a little red squiggly line here, and that's because our API call or our method is not returning us a string. And we're going to fix that in just a second here. But what we need to do next is we need to actually do our web service call out to our web service. And if anybody remembers, we are going to be calling this web service here, right there. So let's create a variable or an implicit var, because we don't know what we're going to get back. We should get a string back, but we really don't know. We're going to call it client, because we are in this particular console, we are creating what's called an API client. We are creating software that's going to run on our machine that's going to communicate with the server. That's called a client. And so we're going to call this client, just to name it, but we need to. We're going to say equals. And then we're going to call, now, let me say this too. I'm not doing this all because I just know this. I referred to the documentation that is in the REST Sharp and the newtonsoft.json websites to help you. They give you plenty of coding examples and ways that you can do different things. And if they don't explain it to you best, you can just Google it, obviously. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new instance of the REST client class. REST client. And we saw REST Sharp there, but we don't see REST client. So if we know that REST client from the documentation is in this REST Sharp library. So if you double click on this REST Sharp library, let's see if we can do that here. It won't let us do that. We won't worry about that right now. Okay, so if we hold our mouse over, we see the little control period, and it says using REST Sharp. So just click REST Sharp. Get out of there. And that gives us a new using up here so that we don't have to do it for ourselves. And then all we're going to do is we're going to pass in the URL. Because if you hover over that, it's asking for the URL to make a request. Step one of our client call is done. If we didn't do anything else, this is going to hit our web service right here. As long as we pass in a URL, valid URL. Next thing we need to do, so this is the request. That's our request. Now we need to stab out something out for the response. Okay, let's make a variable for that. Var response equals. And then what we can do is we can execute our URL hit by doing this, client dot execute. And it tells us what we need in there. We need a method, a request, and a method. And then there's some overloads there. So let's tab that and put a opening parenthesis there. And then we can go up and down to see what we can throw in there. We can do that one. Now that looks like we can just do a URL. So if we hover over that, we can see an iREST request client needs to go in there. So let's put a new REST request, and that's what we need to put in there, like that. See that? Now the I in front of that shows us that it's an interface. And I'll bet you that if we looked inside of the REST request class, that interface is probably in the constructor or the initializing piece of code in this REST request. Let's just go to the definition of this and see what we get in there, if it's going to do anything for us. There we go. So here we have our constructor here, and it's inheriting this iRestRequest class. And if we got to dig it, it's in this DLL somewhere. So somewhere in this DLL is iRestRequest interface. We're not going to do too much digging in here, though. So let's close that. So now we've got a request ready to go. We've got a client ready to go. So we're going to open up our connection to the client. We're going to request information from the I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. We are opening our connection out to the service, to the server via the API. We are requesting information from it here and getting a response. And now if we want to use the information that comes back, we need to return it to our main up here so we can do something with it. So then all we're going to do is we're going to use a method called response.content. If you hover over that, it shows that it's the string representation of what you get back, response content. Like that, and we're going to return it. So now our send API is going to give us a string of JSON back. So if I did anything else, let's say I say string, let's say var output. Output response equals send API. Put a paren there. I'm going to put it this and that. That allows me to put special characters in my like that colon there into my string. Paste this. We'll put a breakpoint on it real quick. Save it and let's build it. Make sure we won't get any errors. No, everything's fine. And let's run this and see what happens here. Right? Right, okay. Yeah, it's me. Okay, so now if I hit F10 here and I hover, I see that I've got information back. Well, look at there. I have information back from our service head. It's all fine and dandy, but I mean, we want to do something with it, obviously. So we're only part way there. So the next thing we want to do, stop picking at your fingers, baby. The next thing we want to do is we don't want to have to put this string and try to parse this string out, because that would just be way too much work. That is what this JSON class of this Newtonsoft API does, or the Newtonsoft library does, Newtonsoft.json does. It will do the parsing for you. So what we can do is we can actually store what we get back from our web service hit into our data models. And one other thing too, good practice is to separate your models into another folder. I didn't do that in this particular one, but it's just good practice to do that too. So you can keep all your data separate. Anyway, so instead of us calling this output response, let's call this models. Like that. Ooh. Models. And then what we want to do is we want to parse this out. So there's a function. Quit picking at yourself, baby. You're sleepy. there's a function called deserializedObject that we can call, and then what we can do is we can create a series of data models in our code to do what we want it to do. So let's do that. Let's call JSON convert. And so you'll see it where we've got to bring in the using, so control period. You see it says Newton Soft JSON using that. We'll put in using to it up there at the top. Now we can call any methods because we're inheriting from it. Dot deserializedObject. I'm hitting tab. Now this allows us to create to take our JSON and parse it out into data objects like we have down here. So we're going to put test class in there like that. Close our little bracket there. And then we have to have an open parenthesis there and then another closed parenthesis over here. And so now if I run this, debug this, and if I hit F10, and if I hover over, if I go to the models down here, I forgot I have this in the watch, you can see I've got 24 data records, and inside of each of those I've got all of the information that I need because it automatically did all the work for me. See that? Now if I wanted to output this to the screen, I can use some logic to output this to the screen for myself. So let's do that. Let me pause this here because I'm trying to resituate my daughter here. I think so because you're... Okay, now we're ready to go here. I need both hands here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're first going to check to make sure we got data back from the web service hit. And to do that, we want to make sure that our string is not null or empty or anything like that. So we're going to say if models dot success or status equals success. And we're going to put this function or this method called string is null or empty on there. And we're going to use the not. Like that. Actually, let's do it this way. So what that does is it checks to make sure our string is not a null or empty string. And what a null string means is that if we got a if we didn't get any kind of an answer back from the web service, we can handle that in our code here. So. Now, if we got something back, we can conditionalize with that too. Else, if models status equals success, then we want to do some code. And actually, let's do it that way. So it will look for success being null or empty. And if it's empty or null, then what it'll do is it'll do whatever I have in this block of code that I specify. If it's not null or empty, it's going to look to see if it equals success. And if it equals success, it's going to do what I have in this block of code here. So let's build this block of code. Well, let's build this block of code first because it's really simple. We're going to say console, right line, and we'll just say there was no answer from the service. Else, if we do get something back,
Oops.
we're going to create a string called output rex equals string.empty. We're just initializing the string to nothing or to empty. So then we're going to take output string, output rex, and we're going to put a header on there. Employee ID, employee name, employee salary, age, profile image. Okay? Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put just a break of page there. We're going to say output rex, oh no, plus, let's do this really easily. Environment, new line. What that does is it actually inserts a carriage return line feed in there for us. So it hits enter on the keyboard twice, basically. And then the next thing we're going to do is we need to loop through the information we've got in our data here. So how do we do that? Well, as we learned in the last lesson, we can use a loop. Now, again, I said in the previous lesson, I'm a huge proponent of using for each loops, like this. Var in models.data. So what that's going to do, it's going to loop through all of the records that I have in my data list or array. It's not an array, but it's a list. And it's going to give me them one at a time. So if there's 25 in here, I'm going to loop this 25 times. And I just want to add to my output record string here. And I think I'll do that. Let's see. Output rex. We're going to use the concatenation operator here. We're going to use a method called string.format for strings. And what we're going to do is we're going to make this a little easier on ourselves. 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Dad.
Yes, baby.
So here's lessons.
Hey, Jay. Shh. Okay, so what this is doing is it's going to use an array of fields that I can put in here. If you look there, it says string format, and it gives us the objects in arguments. So an array. You can put whatever you need to in there as long as you've got the right number of elements in here that you reference over here to the right. And it gives us the signature of what we need to make it look like. So we've got our string here, which is this right here. We need to have a comma here. So what it tells us to do. And then all of our object information here needs to go to the right here. Just like that. So now, since we're looping through this model, and we know a model is going to have ID, employee name, salary, age, and image, we just reference model dot to get that information out of there. So we say model dot ID, model dot employee name, model dot employee salary, model dot employee age, and model dot profile image. And then let's just make another new line in there. Let's just copy this line here, put it in there. And now, stop, baby. We're ready to loop through and to do all of our logic. So in here, let's go ahead and do a console right line, and we're going to output rex. Just like that. That's pretty much all we need to do. So let's build our solution. And let's run through it and see what we get. So the first thing that happens is we run through our JSON here. We've done our JSON. And we've got a status of success. So it falls down to our next loop. We're going to hit F10. And we're now going to start reading our data. So if we look at employee recs or output recs, we see we've got our header here. We've got our character return line feed in there. And we're ready for the next one. You gotta go potty? Just a minute, you guys. I gotta take somebody to the bathroom. Okay. So AJ had to make a pit stop. She decided she was gonna ditch her daddy. I guess I'm too boring for her. So anyway, as we iterate through these models, 3-year-olds, I'll tell you. As we iterate through these models, we see that we are building information in there. And we can step through by hitting F10. But I'm going to hit F5. And we'll see what we get this time. So I go to our console. There we go. Now, why is this important? Well, because what I can do is I can copy all this information here. Copy that. I can come to an Excel spreadsheet. I can paste it in there. Click the data to the text to columns. It's delimited by commas. I can treat them all as text and say finish. And now I've got a bunch of information in there. So that's what you can use web services for. Just imagine if this was hundreds of records or thousands of records. You could iterate through all of this. This is what you would use web services for. This is what you would use conditionals for. This is what you would use looping for. And so, and this is just a small example here. And what I'll do is I will, and this is just one way to do it. Your code does not have to match exactly what I did, because there's other ways to do this. And so let's say I only wanted to get the models that were, I don't know, let's look at our data again here. Let's say I only wanted to get the models that were below the age of 41. I can do this. I can say for each model in that data, say if model dot age is, and now since it's a string, I need to convert it to a numeric value. Let's make it a short. And then we'll do this. Less than 40. Then I want to do all this logic here. So that will give us only the ones that are age 40 or below. As long as that age actually has something in there. And so let's go ahead and hit F10. And now we've got this information here. You can see it's a lot less than what we need here. And let's also say that we wanted to give the person who was running this the ability to do this without us having to put a function in here or put this particular condition in there. That's where we would want to pass in a variable from our argument. And to do that, we can come up here to Project, go into the Properties, come down to Debug, and we can pass in command line arguments. So I can say age is, we'll call it age limit. We'll call it 40, something like that, right? Save that. Now, if I run this and I pause there, and if I come up here to args, you can see I get age limit 40 here. And I can parse that out as well. I can say var command line args equals args dot split on that right there, and I'll hover over that. It says, hey, you can't do that. String args. Why can't I do that? Args dot Oh, because it's a string array. I can loop through it though. I can say for each var. You know what? Let's make it a dictionary instead. We'll say dictionary of string and string key values equals new dictionary string there. I can say for each var arg in args. And then I can put add a key. Oop. Well, let me think this through here. Okay, here's how I'm going to do this. I know I was working earlier, as I was trying to do a split on the entire array, and that's not going to work. You got to do a split on the instance inside of the array, or the array element. So I'm going to take var split val equals r.split. I'm going to split on colon. And then we're going to take split val. We're going to say split val 0 will be the key, and split val 1 will be the value. So now if I go through F10 splits, so now I have 2. I've got a key and a value there. I'm going to add that to my key value pair. So I've got an age limit of 40 there. And now I can say why did I do that? Well, it's actually pretty cool that I can do that though, huh? Got a key value pair there that I can do that on. It wasn't really necessary. But what I can do is I can set this variable and I can say, instead of doing it this way, let's get rid of this dictionary. We don't need this dictionary in here. We'll just create a couple of variables here, and we'll call this one we'll call it string. We'll call it var int age equals, not an int, short age equals 0. And then we're going to take age equals convert to int 16 because it's a short, and we're going to take split val number 1 because that's got our age in there. We can even have some code in here that says if split val zero if it equals what did we put in there? What did we put in there? Age limit. There we go. Duh. I'm no senior moment. Equals age limit. Then age will get converted to that. And then we could also have code in there that would say, hey, if it's not in there, we don't want to do any of this code because you need to have it in there. So then we can come down here, and instead of doing this, we can say less than or equal to age, like that. So then what that's going to do, it's going to do my logic that I was just doing a second ago, except the person who's actually running this can pass in that value on their own. And I don't have to hard code it in there. So now, if I go in here and I look at age, it's 40. So then my condition down here can say, hey, if your age is less than 40, then output it. And if I hit F5 and I look, there's our 40s. Let's change that. Let's change it to 24. Let's see how many we get back this time. We run this. click that. We have 10. Look at that. We got everybody below the age of 40. So that's one way you can make it interactive, where the person who's actually running the code has control over the, some of the variables that they're passing into the function. And if we really want it to be real high tech, instead of doing it that way, we could also do this. Equals convert to int 16. And we're going to take console read line, but we want to make sure that that's going to work. Just for the sake of, let's say that we've got it to where we know they're only going to enter a number. They can enter something other than a number, and this is going to blow up. But let's do this real quick. Oh, we got to prompt them. Console write line. Please enter an age, not an age. Oh, I gotta put a semicolon there. And hit enter. And down here, instead of us breaking on this, let's put a enter any key to end. And that will terminate our code. So let's save this, we rebuild it, and run it. Run it. So now we've got, please enter an age and hit enter. Say 24. Okay. I can run it again. Let's say 12. We shouldn't get anything back. We might actually. Yeah, we didn't get anything back. Okay. And we just saw something in there that we want to put in here. So let's put this down here. That way we don't output anything in there. And we can also put else. There are no data elements, data records that match your criteria. Let's run that and see what we get back. Let's do that 12 again. Ship pop, boom. But we don't want to do that multiple times. So what we can do is we can break out of there and say break. And that gets us out of our for loop. 12. Bam. So this is an example of, again, us doing some code that will reach out to an outside service and pull back data, and we can query the user on what information they want to use. And then we can also do that up here on our web service hit as well. We could append, if you remember, we could append an employee ID in there and pass that to the model. To the web service hit. As long as it matches what you've got here and it matches your API call out, then you should be able to hit it every single time. So we've learned a few things today. Hopefully this helps you.